My name is Elizabeth Moore. I'm 40 years old, and I teach art at a public high school in Portland. If you saw my life now, quiet mornings, paint-stained hands, a small home that finally feels safe, you might think I've always lived like this. You'd be wrong. To have the peace I'm holding on to today, I had to make the kind of choice people whisper about at family gatherings. I had to cut ties with the very people who raised me, not because I hated them, but because I finally understood something that took me decades to learn. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for your child is to stop begging your parents to love you properly. And it all came crashing down on Thanksgiving morning, in my parents' living room, when my mother walked straight over to my 11-year-old daughter, holding a bucket of potato peels like it was a weapon. Before I get into that moment, I need you to see the whole picture, because it wasn't one bad day. It was a lifetime of small cuts, and one final slice that went too deep. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, my phone buzzed while I was cleaning up paintbrushes at the kitchen sink. I had just finished grading projects, charcoal sketches, self-portraits, messy but honest work from teenagers who still believe the world might make room for their creativity. The message was from my mother. No, hi, Elizabeth. No, how are you? No, how's my granddaughter? Just a list. A long, proud, expensive list, like she was placing an order at a luxury market instead of asking her daughter for help. A 24-pound organic turkey, premium Cabernet Sauvignon, fresh cranberry sauce, imported cheeses, artisan bread, and so many other high-end ingredients that by the time I reached the end, my throat had tightened the way it always did. Then came her final line, the one that made my stomach twist. I know you'll take care of these things. That was my mother's favorite kind of sentence, a demand disguised as certainty, a leash wrapped in confidence. I stared at the screen for a long time, feeling the familiar heat rise behind my eyes, anger mixed with shame, because part of me still wanted to believe that if I did everything right this time, maybe she'd finally look at me like I mattered. My boyfriend, Daniel, walked into the kitchen while I was still holding the phone. He's the kind of man who notices silence the way other people notice smoke, like a warning sign. He read my face before I said a word. "Your mom again?" he asked quietly. I handed him the phone. As his eyes moved down the list, his jaw tightened, not in rage, but in something steadier. Disbelief, protective frustration. "Elizabeth," he exhaled, "this is insane. This is like $400 at least." I didn't answer right away. I was already doing the math in my head, like I always did. Tuition payment coming up. The roof that still needed fixing. The grocery budget we kept stretching like it was rubber. Daniel set the phone on the counter like it was something dirty. "You don't have to do this," he said. "You can say no." That word, no, felt like a foreign language in my mouth when it came to my mother. I tried to smile, the practiced smile I'd worn since childhood. "It's Thanksgiving," I said too quickly. "I don't want to cause trouble." Daniel's eyes didn't soften the way mine begged them to. They sharpened. "But that's exactly the problem," he said, voice low but firm. "You're always the one who doesn't want to cause trouble, while they never think twice about the trouble they cause you." His words landed too close to the truth, so I did what I'd done my whole life. I swallowed. I told myself it would be different, that I could handle it, that peace was worth the price. 2 days later, I spent nearly $450 buying everything on that list. As I loaded the bags into the trunk, I kept imagining a version of my mother who would finally pause, finally say, "Elizabeth, thank you. I see you." But hope can be a cruel habit, especially when you've been trained to survive on crumbs. Thanksgiving morning arrived cold and gray, Portland weather the color of damp paper. In the back seat, my daughter Sophie hugged her new sketchbook to her chest like it was a secret treasure. She had begged for it the week before, eyes bright, promising she'd fill it with the best drawings ever. Sophie is like me in that way. Her emotions spill onto paper before she can even name them out loud. Her teachers had already told us she was talented. "Natural eye," one of them said. "She sees stories in faces." Daniel drove while I sat in the passenger seat, staring at the road like it might offer an escape route. Neither of us talked much, but I could feel his tension in the way his hands gripped the steering wheel. When we turned into my parents' driveway, my chest tightened exactly the way it always did, like I was about to walk into a test I could never pass. Their house was big, bright, perfectly trimmed hedges, a kind of polished success that my mother worshipped like a religion. And there they were, my brother's Tesla already parked near the front, my sister's Mercedes gleaming like a trophy. A familiar heaviness flooded my body, because no matter how old I got, no matter how much love I built elsewhere, a part of me still turned into that little girl again, the one who was always trying to prove she belonged. We carried the bags inside. My mother barely looked at us, just a nod, a tight-lipped glance that passed over Daniel like he was furniture, then her usual command. Put the stuff in this kitchen, then help me prepare. That was the greeting. That was the welcome. Sophie lingered by the doorway, gripping her sketchbook. She looked at me like she was asking permission to disappear. I gave her a small nod, and she slipped into the living room where it was quieter. She found a corner near the window, curled her legs under her, and opened the sketchbook like she was opening a safe space. I watched her for a moment, my heart softening despite the tension. She started drawing immediately. Fast, confident strokes. A family scene. A warm reunion. A dream she kept trying to create, even when real life kept ruining the lines. In the kitchen, my mother moved like a storm cloud in human form. Tight expression, sharp movements, barking orders at anyone within reach. Every so often, she glanced at the clock, eyes worried, like the meal was a performance and she was terrified of failing in front of an invisible audience. Daniel helped quietly, steadying me when my hands started shaking from the pressure of being in that house. But when we finally got everything organized, I wandered toward the living room to check on Sophie. She was completely absorbed. Her mouth was slightly open, eyes focused, a small smile tugging at her lips as the picture took shape. She looked peaceful. And then I felt it, the shift in the air behind me, the kind that makes your skin prickle before you even turn around. My mother had followed me. She stopped just a few feet from Sophie, staring down at her with an expression I knew too well. Annoyance, disdain. Like Sophie's calm joy was a personal insult. I opened my mouth to speak, maybe to redirect, maybe to protect, but everything happened too fast. My mother walked straight toward Sophie, carrying a bucket of potato peels from the kitchen. Without hesitation, she slammed it down beside my daughter. Potato peels flew. Wet, limp scraps landed across Sophie's drawing, right over the faces she had carefully sketched. Then my mother grabbed an old apron and threw it directly into Sophie's lap. Her face twisted with rage, like she had caught Sophie committing a crime. The whole room went silent. Even the normal holiday noises, the clatter, the chatter, seemed to disappear, as if the house itself held its breath. Sophie looked up slowly. Her eyes were wide, stunned. Her lips trembled like she was trying not to cry, trying not to make it worse. I felt frozen, my body locked in that old childhood instinct. Don't react, don't provoke, don't make her angrier. But the sight of my daughter's ruined drawing, the fear on her face, it cracked something deep inside me. My mother's voice cut through the silence, cold and sharp. "It's time you contributed something to this party," she said. "You can't just sit there drawing all day." Sophie's fingers clenched around the apron like she didn't understand why it was suddenly heavy. And then, from nearby, my brother's 12-year-old daughter, Madison, let out a giggle that made my stomach turn. "That's right, Sophie," Madison said, smug as an adult in a child's body. "Nobody gets a free ride here, right, Grandma?" My mother actually nodded, like Madison had said something wise. Sophie's eyes filled with tears so fast it looked like her body didn't even have time to decide. Potato peels clung to the page like insults. Daniel took a step forward, his face paling, anger flickering across his features. But he glanced at me first, as if asking, "Are you going to let this happen?" And in that second, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't just about my mother embarrassing my child. This was the exact same pattern that had shaped my entire life, now reaching its hands toward my daughter's throat. And I had brought Sophie into it. I had delivered her to the altar of my mother's expectations and hoped she wouldn't be sacrificed. Sophie's small shoulders shook. She whispered, barely audible, "Mom?" That single word, "Mom," wasn't a question. It was a plea, and it snapped the last thread of my silence. Because if I didn't stand up now, I would be teaching my daughter that her passion was something to be punished. And I couldn't live with that. For a second, the room stayed so quiet I could hear the faint buzz of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the soft scratch of Sophie's pencil rolling against the hardwood as her hand trembled. She didn't even realize she'd dropped it. Her drawing, her beautiful little attempt to turn our messy family into something warm, was smeared with wet potato peels, like someone had thrown garbage onto a dream. I felt Daniel step closer behind me. I could sense the heat of his anger, the way his whole body seemed to brace like a shield. But the shock wasn't what moved me. It was the look on Sophie's face. Not just sadness, something older than sadness. That familiar poisonous question every scapegoat learns to ask. What did I do wrong? My mother stood over her like a judge. Madison smirked, arms crossed, delighted at the attention her cruelty had earned. And I realized, with a cold clarity that made my hands go numb, that this moment was not about potato peels. This was about control. This was my mother reminding everyone, especially me, that in her house, creativity was weakness, and weakness deserved humiliation. I took one slow breath, not to calm myself, to stop myself from exploding in a way my mother could twist into, "See, Elizabeth is unstable." Then I walked forward. Sophie flinched as I approached, like she thought I might be angry at her too. That flinch broke my heart. I crouched down beside her, ignoring my mother's presence towering above us, and gently lifted the bucket away from Sophie's knees. My fingers brushed Sophie's hand. It was cold, clammy. "Hey," I whispered, "look at me." Her eyes met mine, glossy and terrified. I picked up the edge of the paper, careful, like I was lifting something sacred. I started removing the potato peels one by one, wiping the damp mess with the corner of my sleeve. I knew I couldn't fix it completely, but I wanted Sophie to see me trying, to see that her work mattered enough to be rescued. Daniel's voice came from behind me, low and controlled. "That's enough." My mother's nostrils flared. She wasn't used to being challenged. Not in her own living room, not in front of witnesses. I stood, still holding the ruined sketchbook page in my hands like evidence. My mother's eyes darted to the mess on the floor, then back to me. Her mouth tightened. She looked almost offended that I wasn't immediately apologizing for disrespecting her authority. I swallowed once, forcing my voice to stay steady. "I think Sophie isn't feeling well," I said. "We're going home early." It was the most polite sentence I'd ever used to describe a moment that felt like emotional violence. For half a second, my mother just stared. Then her face twisted, anger blooming across her cheeks like a rash. "Don't be ridiculous," she snapped. "The party's about to start. I need everyone to help. You can't keep spoiling her like this." There it was again. That word, spoiling, like protecting your child from humiliation, was some kind of indulgence. Like respect was dessert. I opened my mouth to answer, but I didn't get the chance. From the doorway near the kitchen, my younger brother, Drew, let out a laugh. It wasn't warm. It wasn't even amused. It was the kind of laugh that said, "I'm glad it's you, not me." "Classic Elizabeth," he said, smirking. "There's your habit of running away again. Whenever there's a little difficulty, you're always the first to retreat." My stomach tightened, because Drew was my mother's masterpiece. Tech CEO, confident, untouchable. He had built a life that my mother could brag about at every dinner party, and she treated him like a living trophy. And I was the warning story. The daughter who chose art and teaching and settled. I could feel Sophie behind me, still frozen in her chair, clutching the apron like it was a punishment she hadn't earned. Daniel moved to Sophie's side, resting a hand gently on her shoulder. His touch was careful, like he was afraid she might shatter. Then he looked at my mother. His voice didn't shake. "We're leaving," he said. "Sophie doesn't deserve to be treated like this." My mother's eyes narrowed at him. I could almost see her mind working, trying to file him into a category she could dismiss. He wasn't rich enough for her to respect, not prestigious enough, not obedient enough. So she did what she always did when she couldn't control someone. She attacked. She stepped forward and blocked the path to the hallway. Her face was flushed, her hands clenched. Behind her, Drew and his wife whispered to each other like they were watching a reality show. Madison stood with her arms crossed, chin lifted, looking at Sophie like my daughter was something stuck to the bottom of her shoe. My mother pointed straight at my face, her voice rising so loud it felt like it hit the walls and bounced back. "If you walk out that door right now," she shouted, "don't expect to be welcomed back." The air felt thick. Daniel's hand tightened on Sophie's shoulder. Sophie's breath came in tiny, shaky bursts. My mother leaned closer, eyes shining with fury, and fired the words she'd used to keep me chained for 40 years. "I raised you. I gave you everything. And this is how you treat me? Ungrateful. Ungrateful." The word landed like a slap. Because for years, I had been trying to prove I wasn't. I had been paying for that proof with my money, my time, my dignity. Every holiday, my contribution expected, my presence tolerated, my feelings dismissed. But in that moment, the word didn't make me shrink the way it used to. Instead, it made something inside me go strangely quiet. Like a switch flipped. Like my nervous system finally realized the old survival strategy wasn't working anymore. I looked around the living room. The expensive decorations, the polished furniture, the family photos on the wall, Drew in the center, my sister Tori glowing beside him, my mother beaming like a queen with her heirs. And me? Always on the edge, half-shadowed, smiling too hard, trying to look like I belonged. My gaze dropped to the floor. The floor my mother loved almost as much as she loved status. Shiny, perfect, untouched. And there, near Sophie's feet, sat the bucket, still half full of potato peels, waiting. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat, but my hands were steady when I bent down. I picked up the bucket. All eyes locked onto me. Even Drew stopped whispering. My mother's mouth opened slightly, like she sensed something but couldn't quite name it. Sophie's eyes followed the bucket, confused. Daniel took a half step forward, alert, like he thought I might do something reckless. But I wasn't reckless. I was done. I straightened slowly. Then, with a calm I didn't recognize as my own, I tilted the bucket and poured every single potato peel onto my mother's pristine floor. The sound was soft, wet scraps hitting hardwood. A disgusting little slap, slap, slap in the silence. My mother froze. For a heartbeat, she looked like she'd forgotten how to breathe. Then she screamed, "Elizabeth, what the hell are you doing?" Drew's face drained of color. His wife's mouth fell open. Madison's smirk vanished so fast it was almost funny, replaced by wide-eyed shock, like she'd just seen an adult do something she didn't know adults were capable of. My father stood in the corner like he always did, hands hanging at his sides, eyes fixed on the mess, as if staring hard enough could make it disappear. And then Tori appeared in the doorway, as if she'd been pulled by the sound of chaos. She stood completely still, her designer sweater perfect, her expression blank with disbelief. My mother stared at the peels, like they were a personal attack on her identity. Maybe they were, because that floor wasn't just wood. It was her pride, her proof, her illusion of control. And I had just ruined it. I didn't say another word, not a single apology, not a single explanation. I walked over to Sophie, took her hand, and gently pulled her to her feet. Daniel stood on her other side immediately, like a wall. Sophie looked up at me, eyes still wet, still stunned, but beneath the shock, something else flickered. A tiny spark, like she'd just seen her mother transform into someone she didn't know existed. We started toward the door. My mother lunged forward like she was going to grab my arm. "You can't just—" Daniel stepped between us so quickly it was instinct. His voice was quiet, dangerous in its calm. "Don't touch her." My mother stopped. Not because she respected him. Because for once, someone had made it clear there would be consequences. Drew finally found his voice. "You're insane," he spat. "You're embarrassing yourself." I didn't look back. I didn't argue. I just kept walking, past the scattered peels, past the shocked faces, past the family photos. And when we stepped outside into the cold air, it felt like I'd broken the surface of water after holding my breath for years. My hands shook once we reached the car. Not from fear, from adrenaline. Sophie climbed into the back seat silently, clutching her sketchbook against her chest like a wounded animal. Daniel slid into the driver's seat and immediately reached for my hand. He didn't speak. He just squeezed. A steady pressure that said, "You're not alone." As we pulled out of the driveway, I saw my mother through the window, standing there rigid, her silhouette framed by the doorway like a statue carved from rage. For a second, I expected guilt to hit me. The old guilt. The one that always came after I dared to displease her. But instead, something else moved through my body. A strange lightness. Like an invisible weight had finally slipped off my shoulders. And then Daniel said something so soft I almost didn't hear it. "You protected her." Sophie looked up from the back seat. Her eyes met mine in the rearview mirror. And in that gaze, I saw it. Not just amazement. Not just relief. Admiration. Like she'd just witnessed her mother choose her. Fully. Fiercely. Without hesitation. And that's when I realized the real fight wasn't over. It was only beginning. Because I hadn't just poured potato peels onto a floor. I had poured them onto a family lie. And my mother was the kind of person who never forgave anyone for exposing her. I didn't drive home. That realization came to me somewhere between the second red light and the bridge over the river, when the silence in the car grew thick enough to press against my ears. Home felt too small for what had just happened. Too quiet. Too ordinary. What we'd walked out of wasn't just a Thanksgiving dinner. It was a lifetime of swallowed words and rehearsed obedience. I knew if I went home and folded laundry and pretended this was just a bad moment, I might lose the courage I'd somehow found. So when I saw the sign for the Portland Contemporary Art Gallery, something inside me shifted. "They're open today," I said suddenly. Daniel glanced at me. "You sure?" I nodded, even though my hands were still trembling. "Yes." Sophie didn't say anything, but she lifted her head slightly from her sketchbook, curiosity peeking through the shock. The gallery was hosting a small Thanksgiving exhibition. Quiet, intimate, nothing flashy. The kind of place my mother would call a waste of prime real estate, which meant it was perfect. When we walked inside, the air changed immediately. No shouting, no judgment, just soft light and open space. Sophie slowed her steps, her eyes scanning the walls, like she was stepping into a secret world meant just for her. Her shoulders lowered a fraction, the tension easing. We wandered slowly. Daniel stayed close, giving Sophie room, but never drifting far. Then Sophie stopped in front of a large painting. It was of a little girl sitting under a tree, sketchbook balanced on her knees, sunlight breaking through the leaves above her. Sophie stared at it for a long time. "That looks like me," she whispered. Something tightened in my chest. "Yes," I said softly, "it does." For the first time since the living room incident, Sophie smiled. Not the polite smile she used when she was trying to be brave. A real one. After a while, we sat at the gallery cafe. It was quiet, tucked into a corner with small wooden tables and steaming mugs. Daniel wrapped his hands around a cup he hadn't touched yet, his jaw set in a way that told me he'd been holding something in. "I can't keep doing this," he said finally. I looked up. "I can't keep watching them treat you like you're less," he continued, voice steady but raw. "And I definitely can't watch them do it to Sophie." I nodded. Because he was right. Because part of me had known this was coming. Sophie sat between us, her feet swinging slightly above the floor. She'd been unusually quiet, her eyes fixed on the tabletop like she was tracing invisible lines. Then she spoke. "Mom?" "Yes, sweetheart." Her voice was so small I almost missed it. "Did I do something wrong?" My breath caught. "No," I said immediately. "Of course not." She hesitated, fingers twisting together. "Then why does Grandma hate my drawing?" The words hit harder than anything my mother had said all day. Because this wasn't about embarrassment anymore. This was about how my daughter was learning to see herself. I leaned forward, gently lifting her chin so she had to look at me. "Listen to me," I said, my voice firm despite the ache in my throat. "You did nothing wrong. Grandma doesn't understand art. She doesn't understand creativity. That doesn't mean it's bad. It just means she doesn't see what we see." Daniel nodded beside me. "Your drawing matters," he added. "You matter." Sophie's eyes filled again, but this time she didn't look ashamed. She looked relieved. We wrapped our arms around her, the three of us pressed together in that small cafe, surrounded by paintings that told stories without words. In that moment, I made a silent promise. No more letting my silence teach my daughter that her passions were something to apologize for. That night, Sophie fell asleep almost as soon as her head hit the pillow. Daniel dozed off not long after, exhaustion finally claiming him. But I couldn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying scenes I hadn't thought about in years. The first memory that surfaced was from 10 years ago, the day I told my mother I was leaving my marketing job. 6 figures. Security. The kind of career she could brag about. Her face had gone still when I told her. Not shocked. Disappointed. Like I'd just confessed to something shameful. "You're throwing your life away," she'd said flatly. Just like always. I'd laughed it off then, pretended it didn't hurt. But it had. It always had. More memories followed. The way Drew was praised for every milestone while I was asked to help out financially whenever something broke. The Christmas where Drew received a watch worth nearly $1,000, engraved with, "To my successful son," and I got a discounted tie with no message at all. The night my mother called me at midnight because something in the house wasn't working, and I went over without question. And then, one memory I'd pushed deep down, resurfaced with brutal clarity. 2 years ago, when my parents' house needed major repairs. Drew was too busy expanding his company. My sister Tori had just bought a new home and was drowning in debt, so it fell to me. I withdrew $65,000 from my retirement fund, nearly everything I'd saved. My mother promised that my name would be added to the house papers once the repairs were complete. I remembered how proud she'd sounded when she took the check, and how vague she became afterward. Every time I asked about the paperwork, there was an excuse. The lawyer was busy. The timing wasn't right. We'd do it later. Lying there in the dark, listening to Daniel's steady breathing, I realized something that made my chest ache. I hadn't just given them money. I'd given them permission. Permission to keep taking, to keep diminishing me. And worse, I'd modeled that behavior for my daughter. I turned my head and looked at Sophie's door, closed but glowing faintly with hallway light. The image of her ruined drawing flashed in my mind. The same helpless look I'd worn my entire life. And I knew, without hesitation, that I couldn't let this cycle continue. By the time morning light crept through the blinds, my decision was made. I wasn't going back to apologize. I was going back to set boundaries. Real ones. The kind that don't bend just because someone raises their voice. When I told Daniel my plan over breakfast, he watched me carefully. "You sure?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "And if they can't respect it, then that's their choice." Sophie sat quietly, spoon hovering over her cereal. I don't have to talk, right? She asked softly. I smiled at her. No, I said, you don't have to say anything. Just stay close to us. We got in the car together. This time my chest wasn't tight with dread. It was steady, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't going back to be accepted. I was going back to draw a line. My parents' house looked the same the next morning. Perfect lawn, clean windows, no sign that anything had shattered the night before. But when we stepped inside, the air felt brittle, like one wrong word could make it crack. The family was already gathered in the kitchen. My father sat at the table with his newspaper folded in front of him, coffee cooling beside it. He didn't look up when we entered, just sighed quietly, as if bracing himself. My mother stood at the counter, her back straight, movements sharp and clipped. The tension in her shoulders was so rigid it looked painful. My brother Drew wasn't there. Neither was his family. But my sister Tori sat at the far end of the table, hands wrapped tightly around her mug. She looked up when she saw us, her expression flickering with something between surprise and caution. The room fell silent. My mother turned slowly, eyes blazing. How dare you come back here after what you did? She demanded, each word heavy with accusation. A year ago, that tone would have sent me scrambling for an apology. This time my heart pounded, but not from fear. We didn't come back to argue, I said evenly. We came to talk. That alone seemed to throw her off balance. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she stared at me, like she was waiting for the old version of me to surface, the one who would soften, explain, beg. When I didn't, she crossed her arms. Talk, she said coldly. I reached into my bag and placed a worn accounting notebook on the kitchen table. The sound it made when it hit the wood was small, but it echoed. Daniel stood beside me, close enough that I could feel his presence steadying me. Sophie stayed slightly behind us, her hand wrapped tightly around his. I opened the notebook. I'm setting boundaries, I said. Clear ones. My mother scoffed, but I continued before she could interrupt. First, I said, my voice calm but firm, we will not attend any family event where Sophie or Daniel is disrespected. My mother's lips curled. Second, I went on, I will no longer contribute financially to family gatherings or expenses. Her eyes narrowed further. Third, I said, turning the page, you will either add my name to the house papers as you promised after I paid for the repairs, or return the full $65,000. The kitchen went completely still. Even the clock on the wall felt loud. And finally, I said, closing the notebook, Sophie will never be left alone with you. My mother laughed. It was sharp and joyless, like glass scraping stone. Do you really think you can set conditions with me? She said. After everything I've done for you? There it was, the familiar pivot, the rewriting of history. She stepped closer, her voice rising. You're a public school art teacher, she snapped. Who do you think you are? Look at Drew, look at Tori. And you? What do you have besides paintings and a child you're turning just as useless as you are? I felt the words land, aimed carefully at every old wound. But this time they didn't pierce. Because I wasn't alone. Daniel's hand tightened around mine. My father shifted in his chair, still not looking up. And then, unexpectedly, Tori stood. Mom, she said quietly. Everyone turned toward her. I've watched how you and Drew have treated Elizabeth for years, Tori continued, her voice trembling, but determined. This isn't an equal family. My mother's head snapped toward her. Are you turning against me too? She hissed. Tori shook her head. I'm not turning against you. I'm telling the truth. The room felt like it tilted. I looked at my sister, stunned. She met my eyes briefly, just long enough to let me know she meant it. This isn't about turning against anyone, I said, seizing the moment. It's about respect. I want Sophie to know her grandparents, aunts, and uncles, but only if these boundaries are respected. My mother's face hardened. Boundaries? She sneered. If you want boundaries, you can leave this family right now. I nodded. A strange calm washed over me. If that's your decision, I said, I respect it. Just don't forget about the money. Her mouth opened in outrage. But I didn't wait to hear it. I closed the notebook, turned, and walked out. Daniel followed without hesitation. Sophie glanced back once, then faced forward again. Outside, the cold air filled my lungs. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. I was done. The fallout started almost immediately. By the time we reached home, my phone was already vibrating in my coat pocket like it was alive. I didn't check it right away. I needed one moment, just one, where my nervous system could catch up with what I'd done. Daniel made tea. Sophie curled up on the couch with a blanket and her sketchbook, this time drawing slowly, carefully, like she was testing whether the world was safe enough to create again. Only then did I look at my phone. Dozens of messages, most from my mother. Long paragraphs, written in that familiar tone, half accusation, half martyrdom. After everything I've sacrificed for you, I never thought my own daughter would betray me like this. You've always been selfish. Don't be surprised when consequences come." I didn't reply. Then came Drew. His messages were shorter, sharper, full of indignation. "You're hurting Mom. Do you have any idea how much stress you're causing?" "This is shameful, Elizabeth. You've always been too sensitive." I felt my blood heat at that word. Sensitive. The way it had been used my whole life, like a flaw instead of a strength. I set the phone down. I wasn't doing this again. 2 days later, my father called. His voice sounded tired, the way it always did when he was about to ask me to make things easier for everyone else. "You know how your mother is," he said gently. "Why don't you just call her and apologize? Everything can go back to normal." Normal. The word felt wrong in my mouth now. "Not this time, Dad," I said, surprising even myself with how steady my voice was. "I can't keep doing this." There was a long pause on the other end. Then a sigh. "I understand," he said quietly. It wasn't an apology, but it was something new. That night, after Sophie went to bed, Daniel and I sat at the kitchen table and drafted a message together. Short, clear, no emotional hooks for anyone to grab onto. I sent it to the family group chat. "Regarding the house repairs, I expect a resolution within 30 days. Either my name is added to the house papers as promised, or the full $65,000 is returned." When I hit send, my hands shook, but the relief that followed was immediate. Minutes later, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a private message from Tori. "You have courage I've never had," she wrote. "Maybe it's time I learned from you." I stared at the screen, rereading the words. Then another message came through. "Mom wants me to open my cosmetic practice in the house," Tori continued. "She says it's about keeping things in the family, but I know it's control." For the first time, I saw my sister clearly. Not as the golden child. As another daughter caught in the same web, just wrapped in prettier thread. A week later, I sat across from Patricia, the lawyer Daniel helped me find. She was calm, precise, with eyes that missed nothing. "Suing family is never easy," she said, folding her hands on the desk. "But legally, your case is solid." The word suing made my stomach twist. But Patricia's voice was steady. Sometimes legal boundaries are the only boundaries people respect. With her help, we drafted a formal demand letter. It was mailed and emailed to my mother, requesting the return of the $65,000 plus interest or fulfillment of the ownership agreement. 14 days. When I signed my name, my hand trembled. Daniel stood behind me, his hand resting on my shoulder. "I know this is hard," he said softly, "but it's time." The reaction was explosive. Drew called me that night, his voice loud and furious. "Have you lost your mind?" he shouted. "You're suing Mom. You're destroying this family." "This isn't about money," I said, my voice calm despite the pounding in my chest. "It's about broken promises." He laughed bitterly. "Suing your own mother is how you show respect now?" "I'm sorry you feel that way," I replied, "but the decision's been made." I hung up, blocked his number. Then came my mother's message. Short, cold. I never thought my daughter would become so calculating. The words stung, but not enough to pull me back. The real surprise came 2 days later. My father called again. "I'll handle this," he said, his voice different this time, firmer. "I've let your mother go too far." I didn't ask how. I didn't ask what he meant. For the first time, I trusted him to mean it. 2 days after that, Patricia called. "They want to talk settlement," she said, unable to hide her surprise. "Your mother's lawyer reached out." I closed my eyes. Something had shifted. 2 weeks later, on a quiet Saturday afternoon, someone knocked on our door. It wasn't a hard knock. It wasn't hesitant either. Just tired. When I opened it, my father stood there, holding a thick folder. He looked smaller than I remembered. Older. The lines on his face deeper, his shoulders slumped like he'd been carrying something heavy for far too long. "Hi, Elizabeth," he said softly. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he held out the folder. "I brought this for you." My heart started pounding as I opened it. Inside was a check. $65,000. No interest, no note, just the amount I'd given years ago. Every dollar I'd pulled from my future to fix a house that was never meant to include me. I stared at the check, my hands trembling. My father cleared his throat. "I talked to your mother," he said, eyes fixed on the ground. "She decided she's cutting ties. She says you're no longer her daughter." Even though I'd prepared for this, braced myself for it, the words still landed like a dull blow to the chest. Some part of me had always hoped she'd bend, that she'd realize she'd gone too far. Instead, she chose control over connection. After a long silence, my father spoke again, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't protect you when you needed it. I let her treat you like this for years. I thought keeping the peace was the right thing, but I was wrong." I swallowed hard. I didn't rush to comfort him. I didn't absolve him, because he was right. And acknowledging that truth mattered. Behind me, I felt Daniel's presence. He placed a steady hand on my back, grounding me. Sophie peeked around the corner, her eyes wide with worry. "Are we okay?" she asked softly. I knelt down in front of her, meeting her gaze. "Yes," I said gently, "we are." And for the first time, I truly believed it. My father looked at me then, really looked at me, and said the words I'd waited my entire life to hear. "I'm proud of you." The sentence cracked something open inside me. Tears spilled before I could stop them. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet grief for the years it took to hear that pride and the cost it demanded. When my father left, the house felt still, but not empty. Daniel pulled me into a long embrace. I cried into his shoulder, mourning the mother I never truly had, and releasing the daughter I'd spent decades trying to prove herself. 6 months have passed since that day. My mother hasn't reached out. She cut off Tori, too, for standing up for me. My sister paid a heavy price for telling the truth, but she tells me she's learning who she is without fear guiding her choices. Drew still sends the occasional message blaming me for destroying the family. I stopped reading them after the 3rd month. My father checks in quietly, asking about Sophie. He doesn't ask to visit. He doesn't push. In his own way, he's learning boundaries too. One evening, as Daniel, Sophie, and I sat around our dinner table, laughing softly, the air warm and safe, Daniel looked at me and asked, "Do you regret it?" I thought about the potato peels, the drawing, the check, the door closing behind my father, and the peace I now felt when I woke up each morning. "No," I said. "I only regret not doing it sooner." Sophie smiled, sketchbook open beside her plate. She was drawing again. Freely. This story isn't about revenge. It's about choosing yourself when no one else ever did. It's about understanding that boundaries are not punishment. They are protection. Sometimes, to save the family you're building, you have to let go of the one that keeps hurting you. If you were in my place, would you have done the same?